Oh, hey, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Global Minds classroom involving well-being, inclusivity, sustainability exchanges between the North and the South. Okay, for those of you who were in this classroom last February 24, welcome back. And then for those joining for the first time, welcome. Glad that you are able to join us today, where we will talk about SDGs in particular in connection with Earth Day and human security. For those who don't know me yet, I am Mr. Dino Saplala, an economics instructor of the Ateneo de Manila University. I'm also the coordinator of a course entitled The Economy, Society, and Sustainable Development. With me today are colleagues as well from Ateneo de Manila, de la Salle University, and KU Leuven, including the Center for Women's Theology Studies. So the faculty joining me now may say may say hi as well if they wish before we continue.
Well, good morning to all in Leuven. Goedemorgen allemaal. And good afternoon to all who are in the Philippines. So I work in both De La Salle University and the KU Leuven, and this is part of the Global Minds project of the KU Leuven, Ateneo de Manila University, and the De La Salle University. So welcome everyone to this presentation, and we hope that we will learn from all of you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Mama Marilu Ibita. With me
Okay,
also
so
is
thank
Mama
you also,
Maricel.
Sir Dino. I'm Maricel Ibita. I am a professor here at Ateneo de Manila University. So thank you very much for all who are joining us around the globe. Good afternoon to the students of Ateneo de Manila University, and good morning to the students of the KU Leuven. I hope that we will have a fruitful afternoon and morning.
All right, so moving on, some reminders first before we proceed. Please mute yourselves unless you want to speak to the group. Turning on of cameras is optional, but highly encouraged, especially if we will have time for a breakout session. Actually, my presentation for today is a little longer than last time, but we will see if we still have time for a breakout. And then, so the main session is being recorded right now, and it may be placed in the Center for Women's Studies Theology pages and for other educational purposes. Please set your Zoom names to include your institutional acronyms. And then, if they wish, faculty members of the institutions present today in this room may be assigned as co-host and may opt to participate in the breakout if we will have time later. Okay. So outline. Well, I had that introductory video, but let us also begin formally with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Reflection for Earth Day. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so before we begin with my presentation, I'd like to have a little introductory activity. So this time we will do it in the form of a short game consisting of 6 questions about Earth Day. So I keep on mentioning, or I keep on sharing videos related to Earth Day. So, but since we are celebrating it this week, it is fitting to include the theme in our class. Okay, let me transfer my screen to the setting. In case you have played on the website kahoot.com, that is the website that I will be using. Both faculty and students are welcome to join in case of interest. So these 4 questions on Earth Day and 2 on the SDGs. So how do you join? You will go either to the URL kahoot.it as you see in your screen, and then enter the game pin 7314346. If you want to do it by a mobile phone, you can also download the app indicated here. In case there are still people joining, let me give you 1 minute. At 5:16, we can start again. I think we can start. The SDGs are aimed to be completed by which year? So click your answer based on the correct shape. So correct answer is 2030. It came into effect in 2015. Okay, so Moving on to the second question. Who led the founding of the Earth Day in 1970? Gaylord Nelson, a former US senator during that time. Okay. So, next. So which day is Earth Day? April 22. So actually it's tomorrow, Thursday for this year. Right, next. Which environmental agreement was signed during Earth Day? Okay, so good. It's the Paris Climate Agreement last 2016. Okay, so last two questions. Which book? Which book is this? It was a criticism of the use of pesticides, particularly DDT, indiscriminately. And then there was a certain public reaction about it that eventually led to the establishment of the Environment Protection Agency. It's Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Finally, under each SDG are more specific targets by the UN. How many targets are there in all for the SDGs? Correct answer is 169. Actually, the other two big numbers you see there, 242, represents the number of measures the UN it looks for to check on the progress on those 169 targets. Although technically some of the indicators are redundant, so that makes it about 231 all in all. All right, so Matthias wins our game. Congratulations. And here's our top three. well, unfortunately, I don't have a prize ready, but maybe after the pandemic. Oh, never mind. But at least I hope this helps share some extra trivias about Earth Day and to promote your interest in the said occasion. Okay. If you want, you can react through chat regarding your placing in the game. But for now, let us move on to my presentation. Or before I start, let me just check on one last time if there are still pending registrants. All right, so okay, so can you see my PowerPoint outline once again? So I will have a two-part presentation consisting of an update on SDGs in the current context we have nowadays, and then I will talk as well about a framework which I feel is related to how we can analyze SDGs and even the pandemic. So human security is also another framework that was developed by the UN actually back in the 90s. Then if we have if we still have time, we can have a short breakout, but let's see. Okay, so last February, we talked of the notion of development. So we said that originally development started as an aim towards, let's say, enhancing income and national income measures. But later on, society realized the need to take into account social objectives like what you see in your screen, poverty mitigation, human development, multidimensional freedom, and happiness even. So that's why nowadays you see measures such as Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, which is related to that particular social objective. And then we introduced as well, or reintroduced the notion of sustainable development, which is about meeting the needs of present generations without compromising the needs of the future. So in a way, it's a sort of a balance between the present and future resources. And then sustainability, we mentioned as well last February, has these dimensions: economic, social, environmental, and good governance, as well as being desirable in order to meet the three other objectives. Okay, so if you want, or right now you might be thinking, so how do we measure something as broad as sustainability? Actually, the UN has its official um, 231 indicators, as I have mentioned earlier, although not all of those have readily available data at the moment. So as an alternative, there is this related organization called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which compiled an SDG index related as well to the 17 goals. So how it works is essentially SDSN, including the likes of Jeffrey Sachs, I think, compiled this set of measures. Some of them were from the official indicators of the UN, but some are proxies in case there are issues like getting updated data and incomplete data for some countries and things like that. But anyway, and then once you have a set of indicators for each of the 17 goals, generally the index is normalized, meaning it is compared for one country, it is compared relative to the maximum and minimum performers worldwide, such that it is then normalized into an index which can be measured from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. So what you see right now is a world map consisting or representing SDG index data for the countries that are available in the Sustainable Development Report of the SDSM. So the index is measured, as I said, from 0 to 100. For the greener countries, the darker green you see, that means the higher the SDG performance in general. So as you can see, the green countries, for the most part, are the developed countries. But in order for us to see more clearly, let us move to or move closer to our regions. So in Europe as well as ASEAN, here I show you some of the countries and their SDG index ratings based again on SDSN. And then the scale here is from 85 to 60. So the highest in that range is actually 84.7, which corresponds to Sweden's performance in 2020. And then most of the other Scandinavian countries generally scored between 80 to 85%. So that means that as far as the report is concerned, as of the data collection during this time, these countries are 80 to 85% ready to attain the SDGs in general. And then for ASEAN, generally the countries that perform in the mid-70s, as in around 75%, are Thailand and Vietnam. Actually, another thing that interested me in this map, or another thing that made me interested is it seems that for some of them, not all at least, but for some of them, it seems that there is a correlation to some extent between their performance during the pandemic, especially in its early stages last year, and their SDG ratings. So I'm not saying there's a causality behind it, of course, but if you think about it, it might be interesting to look at further in terms of future research, sustainability, and pandemic performance. Okay, so for the past two slides, I've been showing the SDG index in general. Now let's take a look at in greater detail the 17 SDGs with regards to how they correspond to the UN subregions and income groups. Okay, so in general, for high-income countries and OECD, when it comes to goals like no poverty and, let's say, quality education, they're on the right track. Um, well, so uh, that that could be one obvious hint of why they are high-income countries in the first place. So minimal poverty and more quality education. But it turns out that in some aspects, there are major challenges that remain even for the high-income countries, such as reduced inequalities. In fact, as you can see here, it seems that for SDG 10, it is red across the board, at least as of the Sustainable Development Report 2020. So red across the board. So major challenges remain for most countries in the world, it seems, as far as the SD report is concerned. And then for other groups, for let's say for Oceania and Africa, and there are greater challenges in the other SDGs as well. For middle income, lower and upper, some of their performances in general are either orange or yellow. So in general, challenges remain. Some of them may be significant. Some of them may be minor challenges, which can be hopefully remedied in a few years' time. Although, if I'm not mistaken, the data this figure captures is largely from before the pandemic. So, although the same SDG report also outlines an analysis of, at this point, what can we say about how the pandemic could have impacted the world's progress in general when it comes to the SDGs. So, according again to the Sustainable Development Report, so for now you can analyze the pandemic impact in three aspects: highly negative, mixed, or moderately negative. And then the impact is still unclear. So let me cite some examples according to the report. So for the SDG goals and targets, which are likely to have been highly negatively impacted, why could that be? So for 1, 2, 3, and even 8, even for all of these actually, so chances are they are the direct victims of the pandemic and related lockdowns. So because of lockdowns across the globe, economic activity slowed down. So number 8 gets affected. And then because of the decrease in economic activity, solving poverty and hunger is also more challenging. As for goal number 3, good health, well, obviously it's a pandemic, so health is the major issue of the crisis. And then for reduced inequalities, for example, you can think of it in terms of the discrepancies that people that people have in terms of, let's say, access to digital technology. So much of what we're doing now is work from home or study from home. But unfortunately, different people in different countries have different opportunities with respect to those. Now, for moderate impact, according to, again, to the SD report 2020, these 8 goals are likely to have mixed results with respect to being impacted by the pandemic. So, for example, for water, it's still an issue of inequality and access. And then for same thing for quality education, actually. And then for gender equality, it's included under mixed. For example, because according to data so far, it is cited that higher mortality rates from the virus tend to be among men, for example. And then for about for goals 9, for goal 9, it's mixed because there's an economic crisis, but at the same time, scientists are incentivized, let's say, to innovate and work hard to discover the vaccine as soon as possible. And then, what about this one? The last 4 goals, so 12 to 15, impact is still unclear because on the one hand, you saw that because of the lockdowns, economic activity lessened. And then at the same time, carbon emissions also lessened. So, but overall, what will be the impact in the short term and in the long term? In the short term, lessening of carbon emissions and natural resources use. But in the longer term, there might be pressure on the part of the economy to call, let's say, call for people to relax on environmental safeguards. So those are things that are still yet to be seen at this point. Okay, so yes, even access to vaccines fall under SDGs 3 and 10. So nowadays we see the case of inequities in vaccine access. And then for SDG 5, so violence versus women and children, 16 is on democratic processes. Oh, so if you want to read more on the SDG Index and the component measures, I strongly recommend that you consult this publication by Sachs and others, or this website. In fact, you will find there many nice variables you can use for, let's say, for writing economic research studies. Okay, so let me stop for a few seconds. And now let us think about where we are at so far in this pandemic. So many observers have noted that at least for some, there seems to be clashing to some extent of goals related to taking care of health and public health measures versus taking care of the economy. But let me ask you through a poll on Zoom. Is there really such a trade-off between health and economy? What do you think? So feel free to um, reflect your answers through the poll. And if you have comments and suggestions or questions so far on the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat or let me know if you want to unmute it. Okay, so let's share the results. So in general, according to the majority, there is no trade-off. So perhaps what we need to do as well is to examine how we analyze the underlying issue in the first place. So in fact, although admittedly it is really a very big issue to handle, the pandemic. So there are a lot of concerns that we need to take note of as we try to navigate our way out of this crisis. For the second half of my presentation, I will discuss a bit about what the UN calls as human security. So this is one way I would suggest to analyze the SDGs as well as the pandemic. So traditional security usually refers to state-centric concepts. So security from military conflict and protecting national interests like territorial disputes, things like that. But in general, by 1994, human security was introduced by the UN as a complementary concept. So it includes national security, but it is more than that. So it is a response to multi-sectoral threats and is people-centered instead of state-centered. Then this framework also tackles some universal and interdependent concerns. Like what? Like these ones. So, according to the UN, security is really multidimensional. So, like for example, every time there is a crisis, we really need to take note of, let's say, economic security, food security, health, environmental, personal, community, and political tensions. So whether in a lot of countries today, you actually see most of these threats manifesting somehow when it comes to, let's say, crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. But then, of course, when it comes to strengthening community institutions or solving community security and political security, the role of, let's say, mobilizing communities comes up, or empowering communities, like in this phenomenon nowadays in the community pantries, for example, that sprouted all over the Philippines as a response to people's needs, let's say, in terms of food security, and then maybe even health and personal in some cases. And then if you take a look at these concerns further, actually, they might sound familiar if you think of them in terms of the SDGs. So, for example, for economic, of course, we want no poverty, zero hunger, and we want decent work and some economic growth. And then food security, zero hunger as well. Then health, good health and well-being. And then environmental security, including affordable and clean energy, as well as climate actions and related goals. Then for personal, community, and political, somehow it also manifests itself in the current crisis. For example, with the way governments are examined when it comes to how they react and perform during the pandemic, whether it's for a developing country like the Philippines or a developed country. Okay, so here I feature threats in terms of 7 categories. Now, there is another way to categorize human security according to the UN. This one is even more summarized. So from 7, we group them further into 2. Freedom from want and fear. What is freedom from want? It essentially has something to do with poverty and economic risks and fulfillment of the basic needs of the citizenry. And then freedom from fear is more to do with the psychological and subjective well-being. Literally speaking, you might say we need freedom from fear of the virus eventually. So let's take a look at some indicators which could correspond to either want or fear. So first, for the want, well, what I will show here are mostly the economic statistics from last year in case of the Philippines. So this one, we already know that the second quarter last year was the worst quarter on record, as you can see from GDP and unemployment figures. Well, earlier this year, inflation also became a creeping problem. Although I think right now it's stable at around 4%, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then for employment issues, one other thing that human security actually tackles is the issue of displacement. So people are less secure when they are being displaced. In the UN example, in the 2003 article, I think the example there is more of displaced people due to, let's say, wars. But for the COVID-19 pandemic, displacement happened in the case of, let's say, migrant workers that lost their jobs. And last year even, around June 2020, some of them apparently became victims of, let's say, I think fake, well, it says here, apparent fake news that there were already government flights when there were none. So because flights were canceled due to the various lockdowns last year, then as a result, they got stranded as well in the airport. And then for repatriation, these are the figures provided so far by the Labor Department of the Philippines around late last year and early this year. And then for the fear part, what I will suggest is the Google Community Mobility Index. In a way, this tracks the changes in movement in a community, at least those that can be tracked through, I think, Google GPS. For the Philippines, we are off the worst when it comes to March last year, but so we have slightly recovered, but not yet fully. So we have a long way to go actually when it comes to comparing mobility to pre-pandemic levels, even after the economy opened a bit around, let's say, October to February. So I think the best thing that happened in the case of the Philippines was grocery shopping during Christmas, according to Google. But then, around February though, workplaces were almost back to normal, although because of the recent surge again, workplaces or movement to workplaces dropped again. And then comparing to other countries, in terms of Philippine transit, Philippines is still lagging way behind, but for the other indicators, they are closer. Although we are lagging behind when it comes to transit and retail and recreation. For Belgium, what I found interesting was this. In the case of parks, is this right? Are open spaces being visited now more commonly than, let's say, than compared to the start of the pandemic or compared to the worst of the pandemic? That's good then, if that's the case. And then lastly, if you want to take a look at fear and want concepts holistically speaking, meaning if you want to put them together in one measure, so, one of the things that I found the closest was this Bloomberg COVID Resilience Index, wherein they try to merge into an index indicators when it comes to COVID status and quality of life. So quality of life consists of the bottom 5, and then COVID status is in the top 5 here. Interestingly, when it comes to Belgium and the Philippines, as of March 24, Bloomberg ranks them almost similarly. So Belgium ranked 30, Philippines ranked 35 out of 53 major economies. In the end, the common issues are really vaccine rollout and the severity of, let's say, lockdowns. For the Philippines, what went well for us was a relatively low fatality rate, at least before March 2021. I don't know now. But, anyway, conclusion. So the most important for economic recovery is really to build confidence, which really begins from addressing the underlying health issues and healthcare capacity issues in the pandemic. So public health interventions, when delivered effectively, should be delivered effectively. And then equity issues, including those caused by the digital divide, should also be addressed. And then for SACs, these are the things that, according to him, summarize the essence of the SDGs as well as the transformations that we can. All in all, it boils down to a whole of government response, according to Jeffrey Sachs. Okay, so if you want to read more, I also have suggested references here apart, of course, from the Sustainable Development Report. Okay, so that ends my presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Good morning and good afternoon once again. Since it's already 5:57, we won't have time for a breakout, but I welcome comments and other suggestions before we wrap up.
Well, I'm very grateful for the presentation, Sir Dino. I think it gives us an interesting perspective on the SDGs and the pandemic. And from the perspective of economy, there's really a lot of things to do. I find it surprising that the ranking, I would like to read more about that ranking, because I think in terms of the way we are living life in the Philippines and the way I hear it from my friends in Belgium, the the way they are, I don't know now, but I know that from the Leuven, we are now allowed to go back to classes 20%, but in the Philippines, it's still fully online since the start of the pandemic. So I think I'd like to explore more about those statistics that you have shown. But thank you so much for giving us this overview. Thank you.
Yes, I've heard from a number of universities like in the US, they are targeting a full return to normal in fall 2021. But along with that, they are also targeting vaccinations for for all of their students, which is available anyway in their case. So again, the issue of vaccine access, also as reflected earlier in SDG 3 and 10, should be taken note of. And then for the stats, usually in most articles, for example, of the Google Index, I usually read up on Philippine and Asian statistics when it comes to this measure. But I did find it interesting that once I took a look at Europe, particularly Belgium, so according to Google, park mobility is doing very well now. So that must mean referring to open spaces as of April 2021. Although retail is still behind by around 30 to 40% for most of the countries listed here, except Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And also, I did note things that went well for the Philippines, like the opening of the economy slightly resulted in some Christmas grocery shopping and improvement in workplace mobility. But for the other categories, we are still lagging behind in terms of making people feel safe to go out. Anyway, are there?
Thank you very much. I think it's very challenging what you gave us, and I think it raises a lot of very important questions that we will have to deal with.
Yes, and what I presented mostly focused on the economic aspects as well, but of course it has also its political and maybe even its theological dimensions. That's why the likes of Pope Francis has also written a lot when it comes to the pandemic in his encyclicals.
Just maybe a bit of a comment. With the materials that you presented are very interesting, and I'm just really, wondering how challenging it is for people from the economics to have a lot of innovation in terms of the approach that we will have during the pandemic and after the pandemic.
Yes. In terms of innovation before and after the pandemic. Well, yes, for the economics profession, so far our concern really as well has something to do with finding ways to help government decide on things like what to do with the quarantines. That's why, in our case, the Ateneo Economics Department has faculty, let's say, that do research as part of this FASTER model, which studies an epidemiology model formulated as well by different academics in the sciences. But in our case, the new thing that we introduced in that epidemiology model was to include the economic component. For example, in our case, we really think that it's indeed challenging that how to manage both health and economic concerns, but at the same time, though, looking at it more specifically, it really boils down to issues like healthcare capacity usage, and of course the vaccine access. And then as far as economists are concerned, what we can do now is to try to guide, let's say, government as best as we can in the working papers and other articles being released to them and sometimes to the public as well.
I think with that, we would like to thank Mr. Dino Saplala for his presentation. I hope that this session has been very helpful for the students in Belgium and in the Philippines who joined us in this particular session, and to just help us in finding our way towards building back better in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Saplala, for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone, for being
Thank you.
here. Thank you, Professor Biedinger.
Have a great day or enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you. Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everyone. Thank you well.
Bye.